right. Hello again, everybody, and welcome to the first episode of a new series I'm calling Begin at the Beginning. I have rules that I've created for training. And some of them I've adapted from other things. Like one of my rules is remember to kiss. Keep it simple, stupid. But one of the most basic rules and one of the most important ones that I've created for training is called begin at the beginning. And it's something a lot of people don't quite understand when they're trying to teach someone something that they love. If you are really good at something, or you just enjoy something a lot and are very knowledgeable about it, you will have a very large amount of knowledge of it, and that runs into some issues because you have the advanced form of the knowledge. You will sometimes forget that basic things that you take for granted. Someone that you're training might not know at all. To give you a really simple example that I've actually had to use in my own life, I used to fix computers for extra money during college, and a little after I got out. And one of the things that I had to learn is things that made perfect sense to me, and I could just tell someone could just say to me, and I know what they meant literally nothing to some of my clients. Most of my clients were relatively elderly. They were not good with computers at all, and I did phone tech support for some of them. They just call me up and I talk them through the problem. But doing something as simple as, hey, open your start menu. What's this start menu? Okay, if you're looking at the screen, go to the bottom. There should be a little bar along the bottom. Well, I don't see anything. Move your mouse to the bottom. What's my mouse? Okay, you know there should be a little thing that you put your hand on. It's got two buttons that let you click, one on the left and the right. Yep, that's your mouse. Okay, when you move it, you should see a little arrow on the screen move as well. Yep, that's what I'm referring to when I say move your mouse. To make it easier, let's just call that your pointer. So I'd like you to move your pointer to the bottom of the screen. Oh, a little bar popped up. Yep, now the far left of that bar, there should be a little button with, it looks like maybe like a little flag or a window that's got four panes in it. Yeah, I see that. Click on that. That's your start button. It's an actual conversation I've had to have with clients, and they don't have to be old. I have people my age that don't understand computers, and people younger than me. It's just what you learn and what you don't. So the idea of begin at the beginning is I'm going to actually go through the thing that this channel is at this point most known for, which is D&D, and I'm going to start from the beginning. I've had quite a few comments so far talking about things like, well, I don't understand D&D, but I like your videos, or I don't know how to play, but these videos are really interesting. If I ever start playing, I'll definitely use them. And I realized with my things like D&D deep dive, they require a fair amount of knowledge to even understand most of the terminology. And the other D&D videos I've done, they kind of assume you already know what D is. So this series is going to be entirely. Let's start at the beginning and give people who have never played D&D, no matter what your age, an idea of what we're talking about. Talk about some of the common for phrases and things like that we use all the time. Give a basic understanding of how D&D and RPGs work, and just kind of a really great resource if you've never played D&D. I'm hoping this series will make it so you can literally walk into a store, go to their wall of books and just go, I want to get this book, and open it up and be able to start reading and understanding most of it without too much difficulty. Now, the 5th edition Player's Handbook has a great introduction to D&D, as do most of the other ones as well. But the 5th edition one, I have to say, is the best. But speaking about that, one thing that D&D players kind of forget is this idea of 3rd edition versus 5th edition versus advanced Dungeons and Dragons or basic. None of that really makes sense. I mean, we have similar things in some very specialized fields, like wow, diagnostic DM. My word, I can't remember this. I cannot. DSM. There we go. The DSM 5. That's the Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. It's basically the book that psychiatrists, psychologists, the therapists use to diagnose mental disorders, and it is the 5th edition of that book. You see this for a lot of things like the International Statistic of Medicine, the things like that. But as far as in our regular everyday lives, you don't really have, oh, this is the newest version. Beyond things like Windows 10 versus Windows 7 versus Windows XP, stuff like that. So this video specifically is going to give you a very brief history of Dungeons and Dragons and the editions themselves, and kind of the things you can expect in the editions. Additionally, which is a different word, I'll also be showing you how to spot the different editions in the wild. I know this is kind of a long intro, but it's a complicated thing. So let's start with let's start at the beginning. Let's begin at the beginning. Dungeons and Dragons, as we know it, started off with a guy named Gary Gygax and another dude I can never ever remember his name, but it was a combination of two people. If you know his name, I know there's a lot of people who do. Put it in the comments for me so I don't keep forgetting this very important person in D&D. But Gygax is the one that's considered the father of D&D. He was a really big gamer, which, if you're not familiar with that, wargaming is basically where you have these maps, and you have these miniature figures that represent troops in a battle. It's called miniature wargaming or wargaming. And what you do is there's rules about how far each unit can move and how they can attack other units, and you would use it to simulate large battles. And it could be anything from medieval fights with archers and horses. I think the most popular ones at the time were wargaming with modern units, like recreating World War II, stuff like that. Very similar to Risk, but a lot more complex. So Gary Gygax was a fan of these wargamings, but he had this idea. Is like, well, what if instead of guns and tanks, we had like fantasy characters like from Lord of the Rings, where you'd have fighters and wizards, and instead of like artillery, they could sling spells and that, and instead of like a single mini representing a battalion of troops, what if they just represented one character, and they could go and fight creatures like dragons and zombies and skeletons, things like that. And he and this other guy I can't remember because I'm a moron, went and developed what was called, they just called the Dungeons and Dragons at the time. And nowadays, it's called OD&D or original D&D. It was a really basic game compared to the stuff that came after it. There was actually only 4 classes in the first Dungeons and Dragons, and technically there was only 3 in the very first edition of it. They were the cleric, the fighting man, and the magic user. They added what's called a supplement, which is just an addition to the rules, generally themed around something. This one was themed around a castle that Gygax had created called Greyhawk. It was this very large castle, and underneath the castle, it was built on top of a dungeon. So what would happen is his players lived in Greyhawk, and then they would just go to the basement and they would fight lower and lower, trying to clear out this dungeon. And that was the Dungeons and Dragons. In that first supplement, they added the thief class, and that was it. If you played the Dungeons and Dragons, original Dungeons and Dragons, you were either a cleric, a fighting man, a magic user, or a thief. And they basically kind of fit the 4 kind of roles you could have in D&D, which are still kind of used today. You had the cleric, who was a support spellcaster. They could heal, they could buff. You had the fighting man, who was the guy that basically waded into combat and just got down and dirty with it. They used weapons, they took hits. You had the magic user, which is kind of the nuking class. They could do these incredibly elaborate and powerful spells, but they were super weak. Very easy to kill. We call that squishy. And then you had the thief, which is all about stealth and cunning, and darting in and getting the drop on people. And nowadays, even in the 5th edition, with its refined rule set and everything, you still basically have those the things. Now, a lot of classes can play a combination of those play styles. Like a lot of clerics can do this support casting now, but can also go in and fight. Or can stand back and nuke with the divine spells. But this is how it started. Now, one of the things that's defined D&D has been its logos. And at this early point of the game itself, and this was released way back in 74. Yeah, 1974 is when it first came out. The original logo looked like this. Now, but because it was really early in the lifespan of the game, the logo kind of varied between products. The original D&D wasn't a huge proponent of protecting their brand or copyright, so they really let just about anyone publish materials for it, and everybody had kind of their own version of the logo. But the font that you see in here That was kind of the thing that kind of brought everything together. For the most part, everything that you use the original D&D rule set and later on the basic rule set, which I'll talk about in a second, used this logo. And so, in general, you are almost never going to find this logo in a game shop. The books themselves are out of print and have been for decades. No one really sells them other than you can find them online. Things like the DM's Guild sells digital copies of some things, so you may find that. However, the most common place you are going to find the original Dungeons and Dragons logo is on video games. Now, this is actually advanced Dungeons and Dragons, but you can see the font is somewhat similar, not really. We'll get to Advanced Dungeons and Dragons in a second. I actually don't think they have any games based on the original Dungeons and Dragons. So let's keep going forward. We'll win. To get back to my thing. Around in the 1977, they released a new version of D&D. They called it Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. And to go along with it, they also kind of revised the original rules of OD&D, and they called it Basic. And for the first two versions of the game, which we call editions, they actually had this parallel thing where you had the advanced version and you had the basic version. The basic version stayed mostly the same. You still only had four character classes in the basic version. And at first it was very limited. You only were able to get to level 3, and if you wanted to get to higher levels or anything, you were encouraged to go to advanced Dungeons and Dragons, right there. Again, Advanced Dungeons and Dragons literally was that. It took everything from the basic rules and just added more things to it. It added higher levels. It added more customization options, the things like that. You had less restrictions on the races you were allowed to use for each character class. Like in the original Dungeons and Dragons, if you were a dwarf or a halfling, you could only be a fighting man. If you were an elf, you had to be either a fighting man or a magic user. And any non-human races actually had limits to how high they could go in the original D&D. So that they added advanced and basic Dungeons and Dragons. But basic Dungeons and Dragons still used variations on this logo. The ampersand itself would change every so often, but the font was mostly the same. So anything with that kind of weird, archaic looking font is probably the original or basic set of the Dungeons and Dragons. Now, as people got, as it got more popular, the basic series got more supplements. They had, let's go to here. Around in 1981, they released the Expert set, which would let you get up to level 14. Around 83, they added the Companions set, which would let you get up to 25, and then the Master set in 84, which got you to level 36, and then 85 had the Immortals set, which got you up to above the 36 level, anything above 36 level, which is a lot different than now with 5th edition only limiting you to 20 levels, but that's how it was. That was the Dungeons and Dragons basic, and all of those games were sold in boxes. They didn't have different rule books, like we'll get to in a second with advanced Dungeons and Dragons. You will get all three books in a single box, and the boxes were color coded. The first basics set was a blue box. Then when the expert set came out, you had a magenta box that came out. That was the new basics set. And you had the expert set, which was a light blue box. And then when they went to Companion, Master, and Immortal, that's when the sets we are most familiar with came out. You had the basic set, which was still for levels 1 to 3, and it was a red box. Nowadays, people will call the starter set of any D&D edition the red box after this original box. It literally was a red box with a picture of a dragon and a dude with a sword and and a big logo saying Dungeons and Dragons. And it became the introduction for most people to Dungeons and Dragons. And then the nice thing about it was these box sets had everything you needed to play. They had the character creation options. They had the dungeon master options. They had the monsters you could use. Everything was there. Very much like the starter set for 5th edition. That's what these were supposed to be. And because they were like pick up the box and play, they were very limited. And because they had, a different development path than Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, there were rules and the things like that actually contradicted themselves in the two different editions, or the two different path of creation. So that was OD&D. Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. This is the one we're a little bit more familiar with if you're looking at modern D&D. You had a lot more classes. They expanded it to Bard, Cleric, Monk, my favorite class, Thief, Fighter, and Magic User. And they had some subclasses for each of them. A subclass of the Cleric was the Druid that we all know and love. A subclass of the Thief was the Assassin, which was a very aggressive killing type thief. That's a little bit more akin to... excuse me, I apologize. A little more akin to what we kind of consider modern rogues, like in WoW. These guys that can backstab and do crazy damage by sneaking around. That was the Assassin. Now, there were a few caveats. Things like the Bard wasn't technically a core class. It was kind of what you would call a prestige class in later editions. Basically, you couldn't create a Bard at level 1. You had to take some levels in Fighter, you had to take some levels in Thief, and then you could change into a Bard. So playing a Bard is kind of complicated. But playing a Monk was even worse. To play a Monk, you needed to have 15 Strength, 15 Wisdom, 15 Dexterity, and 11 Constitution. That is a really, really good set of rolls in order to play a Monk. So monks were almost just not used, almost at all. Just because they to roll stats that high, you had to kind of try pretty hard. But that was Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. Now, another thing that Advanced Dungeons and Dragons did was they added the idea of 3 core rule books, which would fill the Dungeons and Dragons and basically be what people expected of the Dungeons and Dragons, for the rest of its existence up until now. The first book to come out in advance to the Dungeons and Dragons was the Monster Manual, because theoretically you could use all the monsters in advanced Dungeons and Dragons in the basic set and original D&D as well. They hadn't really gone through massive rules changes or anything like that. So the Monster Manual came out in 77. The Player's Handbook came out in 78, and that's where all of the more advanced classes were, the more advanced class options, the things like that. Things had basically made the D&D more complex. Now, again, this is happening at the same time that the basic set is out. 79, the Dungeon Master's Guide came out to give people a little bit better idea about how to run these higher level games and stuff like that. And that was it for advanced Dungeons and Dragons up until 85, when a thing called Unearthed Arcana came out, which is something that we still see today on the D&D website. Unearthed Arcana was basically rules supplements. And they were introduced in a bunch of ways. There were magazines for Dungeons and Dragons. There was Dragon magazine, and eventually there was a Dungeon magazine too. But what it was people would write articles and create new rules, new settings, things like that, in these magazines. And Unearthed Arcana was basically this first really big update to advanced Dungeons and Dragons. It had a bunch of new races, some classes, and a few more expanded rules to make advanced Dungeons and Dragons that much more complex. Specifically, it added the Cavalier, which was a knight kind of class, the Barbarian, which you should know, and the Thief Acrobat, which actually became pretty popular due to the fact that the D&D cartoon, one of the characters was an acrobat, and she had a staff that she could grow and shrink, and it could put her... let her do cool stuff. So that was advanced Dungeons and Dragons. Now, like I said before, you're probably not going to find too many advanced Dungeons and Dragons books on the shelves. Again, they've been out of print for years. They don't really reprint them often, though I think a few have been. You might find a book here or there at a used bookshop. But like I said before, the thing you're going to notice it the most on is the video games. D&D video games have been around for a while. They've been extremely popular. The one you see right here, that is part of a series called the Gold Box games. The Gold Box games all use this same engine, and were all based on the advanced Dungeons and Dragons system. Now, AD&D, most people refer to that as first edition. So if you hear first edition, they're referring to advanced Dungeons and Dragons. If you hear basic or OD&D, that is the first version, but it's not for first edition. I know it sounds a little confusing, but that's just how it works. There are a ton of Gold Box games. They actually have them set in a couple different campaign settings, which are just worlds that you can play in. Pool of Radiance, Curse of the Azure Bonds, Secret of the Silver Blades, and Hillsfar were all set in the Forgotten Realms, the current campaign setting that most of fifth edition books are set in. They also had Dragonlance, which was is a different world. Dragonlance is Dragonlance. It's kind of a where you could consider Forgotten Realms kind of a combination between high fantasy and dark fantasy. Dragonlance is a little bit more towards the dark fantasy style. It's a little bit bleaker. I'll do campaign settings in another video. So yeah, the gold box, really popular. You can actually get gold box games now. You can get them on what's it called? GOG. If you go to GOG.com, you can buy collections of a lot of the old gold box games, and they're still pretty fun. The first one came out in 1988, so they are graphically they are very, very old. The sound in them, some people like it for nostalgia. It ain't great. So if you don't mind really steep learning curves and stuff like that, not a whole lot explained, the gold box games are a ton of fun. Yeah, that was Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, which again lasted all the way until 1989, which is when Advanced Dungeons and Dragons second edition came into being. And this is where the numbered editions become official. Now, at the same time Advanced Dungeons and Dragons came into being, new versions of the basic set came out as well. So at this point, there was still Advanced and basic. Basics still used variations on that old D&D logo. But second edition used this really cool new logo, and it was blue, white, and red. Really nice. Some pretty big changes. In second edition came in the form of reacting to criticism that had happened in the media. If you guys ever hear of these satanic panic, that was this period in the 80s where all these churches and conservative groups were basically saying D&D was a cult worship, and that by playing D&D, you are actually summoning devils and demons and the things like that, and contacting and worshiping Satan. I grew up, my father was a pastor. I grew up in a very conservative Christian household. I grew up being told that D&D was of the devil. And I mean that literally. I was told that. So second edition made some pretty massive changes. They got rid of they got rid of all the references to demons and devils and stuff like that. And anything in there that could be misconstrued as satanic or devil worshipping. They changed their magic systems a little bit, adding schools of magic. They also added the dreaded THAC0, which seems more complicated than it actually was, but it stands for two-hit armor class of 0, and it was just confusing. Armor class in first edition and second edition was backwards. You wanted a lower armor class than rather than a higher one, and you can actually have negative armor classes. And that was just because they would basically add, when they rolled their dice to attack you, they would kind of, in a weird way, add your armor class to their roll. So if you had a negative armor class, it actually subtracted things from the roll. I know it sounds complicated. In the game itself, it wasn't, because they did everything backwards, but yeah. Anyway, so second edition comes out. They also do a thing where they actually group each of the classes into groups, or meta classes. But basically, based on the basic set where you had, cleric, fighter, magic user, the thief. In the advanced version, you had 4 meta classes. You had warrior classes, wizard classes, priest classes, and rogue classes. The warrior classes were fighter, paladin, and ranger. The wizard classes were mage and specialist wizards, which were based on the now 8 schools of magic that we see in the thing. And it basically just meant that these specialist wizards were really good at their chosen casting, and were forbidden to learn spells from the one that was opposite them. The priest classes were clerics, druid, and then basically they had specialists, priests like Painbearer of Ilmater, which are basically just very, very specific clerics that served a specific deity in a weird way. And then for rogue, you had thief and bard. Now, one of the unique things about second edition D&D is, in addition to your classes, you also had what were called kits. Kits were modifications to classes to make them play a little different. You could basically kind of call them subclasses, but there were subclasses that you chose at level 1. So, as a paladin, you could be a paladin, or you could choose a blackguard, which was an anti-paladin, an evil paladin, if you didn't want to deal with all of the rules of being a paladin. Things like that. With kits, they were able to add back in the barbarian and the monk, which you didn't hear me list, my favorite class, was added in as a kit. So where are you going to find AD&D's second edition? These books, I believe, have actually been reprinted because they came out in the early 90s and the very, very late 80s. A lot of them still exist. So you use bookstores and stuff, you can find things with this logo on them without too much difficulty. Obviously, they're not nearly as common as some of the later editions, but it's possible to find them. However, yet again, the most common place you're going to see this logo is in video games. Now, it's a little hard to see here, but this is Ravenloft, one of the old classic SSI D&D games, of which there were tons. I'm trying to see. Yeah, there were the things like Ravenloft, Al Kandim, Menzo Baranzan, the Slayer, I think, was a more generic one. Even the Dark Sun, was an SSI game. That was it was slightly different. You can see it's actually using a modified version of the second edition rules, which is really hard to see because it's way. This is so hard backwards. It's way up at the top here. So let me zoom in for you. There's the Advanced Dungeons Dragons second edition logo. So you can tell that this game is going to use THAC0. The Baldur's Gate series all used second edition. Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, this is the second edition. I had a hard time finding pictures of it that actually used this logo. But yeah, so some of the most well-known computer RPGs that were D&D based, they were second edition, and they're a lot of fun. The Baldur's Gate games are still crazy fun. Icewind Dale 1 and 2 is fantastic. Yeah. So that was AD&D's second edition. Around the year 2000, or actually around 1988, they started playtesting a new version. Adding more complexity, adding more to it. This was going to be the most advanced version of Dungeons and Dragons. However, like I mentioned before, there was two lines of D&D. You had the Advanced, which was 3 separate books that you bought separately. And you would have supplements that came out for it, and adventures for it, and things like that. Then you had the basic set, which would all come in a box, and was generally limited to levels, and you'd have to buy a new box to level up. Third edition changed all that by going, you know what? We're only going to have one version of D&D. And it's going to make it so we're no longer contradicting ourselves. People are no longer confused about what works with what. We're just going to launch Dungeons and Dragons third edition. And in 2000, they actually launched it with the Player's Handbook, which we generally refer to as the PHB. The Dungeon Master's Guide, or the DMG, and then the Monster Manual, which most people, when talking, won't abbreviate, but in text you might see it as MM. It's just easier to say Monster Manual in conversation. So this is the third edition logo. Any adventure you find that's written for the third edition will have this logo, and it will be prominent. This is when the D&D really heavily started branding. Wizards of the Coast bought out TSR, the original company that published Dungeons and Dragons, in 1997. So third edition was the first edition of D&D that they really got to control, and they went hardcore on the branding. Literally any product that was made using the third edition rules had this logo on it somewhere, including probably one of the best known third edition products, Neverwinter Nights. Now you guys can see at the top, there is a Forgotten Realms banner, which again is a campaign setting. Forgotten Realms had been branding really well all the way back to like original Advanced Dungeons and Dragons for first edition. But you can see at the bottom here, and I'll blow it up for you so you can see right next to the BioWare logo. Is that the Dungeons and Dragons logo? They stamped it on everything. It was a branding thing. Third edition was a pretty massive change. Um, they changed up how the things work. A lot of the class restrictions were removed almost entirely. There were a few where you still had to be a specific race to play a specific class, but it was much more expansive. They also had a lot more core classes in third edition. There was 11 base classes, which were barbarian, bard, cleric, druid, fighter, monk, my favorite, paladin, ranger, rogues, sorcerer, and wizard. Now, sorcerer had actually shown up as a kit in second edition. This was the first time it became a core class. Third edition is famous or infamous for what's called rules bloat. It just means there was a lot for the third edition. Characters became much more complex. You no longer would have just proficiencies in weapon types, like you're proficient in a longsword or a dagger or a longbow. Now you had proficiency in the non combat abilities, which they called skills, and you had tons of skills. In second edition, skills kind of existed. Like rogues would have a lockpicking skill, a disarm trap skill. Third edition created a ton of skills. There was a tumble skill, which is what you used if you were next to someone and you didn't want to get an opportunity attack, but you needed to move. You would roll a tumble check to see if you could dodge them trying to swing at you. There was persuasion, deception. There was sense motive, which is now what we refer to as insight. There were things like crafting magical items. They called them wonders items. Literally, if you could think of it, there was a spot skill to detect people when they were hiding from you. There was a stealth skill. There was a there was a hide skill, and there was a move silently skill. So hide was if you were just hiding somewhere. Move silently was if you were hidden and wanted to move. Two different skills. There were feats. There were tons of feat. Every other level, your character would gain a feat, and third edition would actually go up to, I think it could get up to level the 30, depending on the rules you were using. I think the basic version would top it at 20. So every character got 10 feats. Fighters got extra feats. And the feats did everything. Some feats would give you proficiency in a single new weapon. Some would let you do things like punch better, like a monk. Or would let you cleave, which meant if you killed someone, you could swing at the next target. And you could get advanced versions of these. Like improved cleave meant not only could you hit someone and then hit another person, if you killed a second person, you could swing again. To the point where fighters with like a great sword and improved cleave could go into a group of like kobolds and just go boom, 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 and whack-a-mole them all. It was very, very complex. And the other thing that was kind of unique is while you could get to level 20, most classes stopped giving you improvements after around anywhere from level 9 to level 12. And that was because third edition introduced what was called prestige classes. So what would happen is you would have your base classes, and then you would have prestige classes. Prestige classes required, generally would require uh, uh, enough levels in either certain skills or would require certain feats before you could to take that class. Generally, you wouldn't go into a prestige class until uh, uh, around level 7 to 10, somewhere in there. And prestige classes were things like the assassin, the blackguard changed from a paladin kit to a prestige class. Shadow dancers, arcane tricksters, eldritch knights, red wizards. They had tons of prestige classes. Now, that meant that there was a lot of customization. It also meant that the game got extremely complicated. Modifiers would get nuts. Something as simple as dual wielding. If you wanted to dual wield, there were some rules. Having a weapon in your offhand would add a minus 2 to your main hand attack rolls. So whatever your bonus, let's say you had a plus 5 to melee attack rolls. It would turn into a plus 3 while you were dual wielding. And to make an attack on the offhand, you would have a minus 6 to that attack roll. Now, there were feats like dual wielding, which would subtract 4 from the offhand penalty, which could further be impacted if it was a light weapon. It would further remove minus 2 from that. There was improved dual wielding, which helped both of them. There was ambidexterity, which allowed you to not have an offhand, which just made everything hit better. So rolling a single attack roll, you would have to look at the, let's say you're attacking with a longsword. You would have to attack with the longsword, which is a strength-based weapon. So you'd add your strength modifier. You would add your basic attack bonus if you had one. You would check to see if you were dual wielding. You would check any feats like specializations or focuses on the weapon itself. Then you look to see if the character itself had anything that would modify it, and it just became a nightmare. A lot of people loved the third edition. They really, really did. But it was one of the things that started the decline of D&D because it became so complicated and so niche that new players were afraid to start. And D&D saw its first drop in player base in its history. Not saying third edition isn't a great system. It really is. It is not a beginner-friendly system. Even the video games where everything is done for you can get very complicated. Now, something you will hear often is 3.5. This is something that happened in both third and fourth edition, where about halfway through the run, they added, but because of the rules bloat and just how many different things there were, they added a revised version of third edition, which everyone just called 3.5. Uses the exact same logo. You can't tell by the logo if they're using the 3 or the 3.5. But all 3.5 did was it adjusted some class balances, it modified a few things just to make the game more playable, since when they first created it, you just had 11 core classes and maybe a dozen or so prestige classes. By the time 3.5 came around, you had your base classes and then dozens and dozens of prestige classes and new feats. And so the 3.5 is just a refined version of the 3. I don't think I know anyone who prefers 3 over the 3.5. 3.5 is just the definitive edition of third edition, and it was a solid game. During third edition, the Wizards of the Coast released what was called the Open Gaming License, the D20 license. But basically, it let other people use the basic rules of D&D without using any of their intellectual property, like owlbears and beholders and some of their class stuff, to make their own game legally. And that's where Pathfinder came from, which is still the biggest competitor to D&D, though 5th edition is kind of tanked Pathfinder's up above player base because of how great the game is. So that was the 3rd edition. Like I said, tons of D&D video games used the 3rd edition. It's very, very possible. If you're looking at isometric RPGs, like again, Baldur's Gate, or not Baldur's Gate, sorry, Neverwinter Nights, the Temple of Elemental Evil, a lot of those use the 3rd edition. Baldur's Gate, again, uses the 2nd edition. Yeah. Then we get to the edition that must not be named. 4th edition. One of my personal favorite editions, my first tabletop edition. I loved 4th edition. It was a fantastic thing. 4th edition was basically where did we go? Sorry, I'm looking at my notes here. For 4th edition, in 2007, Wizards of the Coast announced that they were working on a new edition, and it was based on feedback from players that were getting frustrated with the 3rd edition and the 3.5. But big things that people were complaining about. Combat was extremely complicated. The game itself took forever to play because all the different skills and keeping track of everything was just a lot of work. So the D&D wanted to create a streamlined version that everyone could play. There were other criticisms that they took into account as well. Things like how wizards, at low level, wizards were practically useless. They had a few really weak spells. They could only cast them 3 or 4 times a day. So after they cast, low levels, after they cast like the 3 or 4 spells, they were done for the entire adventuring game, day. Once they got to high levels, they outclassed everyone. They could take out entire swarms of enemies and some boss characters almost single-handedly. The old expression was fighters improve linearly, wizards improve exponentially. And it was true. So 4th edition was Wizards of the Coast trying to fix the problems that players were having. It was met with controversy. 4th edition changed everything. First of all, this was the 3rd edition logo. Pretty different from the old 2nd edition logo. But, it still looked Dungeons and Dragons, and they did it everywhere. 4th edition logo, boom. They get rid of the sword motif. The ampersand becomes a little bit less pronounced. And again, they go heavy on the branding. This shows up on every 4th edition supplement. And personally, I like the logo. It's got this metallic feeling. It's got that kind of bronze outline to it. It's great. This system itself changed everything. Let's start off with classes because we've been talking about that. Again, for 4th edition, released very similarly to third edition, where it came out with a player's handbook, DMG, and a monster manual. However, they didn't just release one player's handbook. They released three, like a year or two between each one. The first player's handbook, the first core classes were cleric, fighter, paladin, ranger, rogue, warlock. First time showing up as a core class. Warlord and wizard. And warlord was a new kind of class that hadn't really been focused on in any other editions. Now, they did go back to kind of the 4 meta classes type things, but they changed them. Instead of being basically warrior, cleric, wizard, and rogue, they had leaders, defenders, strikers, and controllers. Each one had a different focus. Each one had a different way they did it. I've explained this before, but leaders were healers. That's what they did. They kept people alive. Defenders were fighters. They were your tanks. Strikers were the ones that just did crazy amounts of damage. They were generally a little bit squishier, which means they were a little bit easier to hit, a little less hit points, but they did a lot more damage. And controllers were designed to manipulate the battlefield. They could move monsters around to put them in better positions. They could cause status ailments like slowing them or paralyzing them, making them grant combat advantage, which makes them easier for everyone to hit. They were cool systems. In addition to the new classes, and we'll talk about the other handbooks in a second here, they changed how the classes played. No longer would you just make an attack or use a spell or a ability. Now, all classes had what were called powers. You had at-will powers, which were listed in green anywhere you saw them. Those you could just use whenever. And they had at-will combat powers and at-will out-of-combat powers. You had what were called encounter powers, which required you to rest for about 5 minutes before using them again. Meaning, they were called encounter powers because in a combat encounter or in a role-playing encounter, you could use them once, and then you had to take a rest. They were read in all of the books. Then you had the daily powers. These you could only use once a day. You had to take an 8-hour long rest to get their uses back. And as they got more difficult to use, they became more powerful. What this did was, instead of having wizards where they could do these massive multi-target attacks or launch bolts of fire, every class had the ability to do cool, powerful things using their powers. Wizards were no longer massively overpowered, but they still had their own unique flair and feeling that made them feel powerful. The core classes played very differently. The other thing that was nice, at level 1, you would start with generally 2 at-will powers, 1 encounter, and 1 daily. But every class had anywhere between 4 to like 7 or 8 at-will powers to choose from. Normally like 4 or 5 encounters, and around 4 or 5 dailies for that level. So you could have a party with 2 fighters that played massively different, to the point where they might not even have the same stats they focused on. All classes had a primary stat like strength, and then they would have a couple secondary stats like constitution, or wisdom for the fighter. Maybe I'd have to look again. And what that's turned into is there were certain powers that would add extra damage or add extra abilities based on a secondary modifier. So if your constitution was really good as a fighter, you would try and pick abilities that were buffed by your constitution. And it was really cool. It was really interesting. And again, it was based entirely on feedback from players. Now, just like third edition, fourth edition had rules bloat. Not quite as bad as third edition, but it was still pretty bad. You still got feats every other level. Fighters still got extra feats. So because fourth edition went up to the 30th level, that was 15 feats minimum for every class. They also changed leveling up. Instead of prestige classes, they had what were called Paragon Paths and then Epic Destinies. Levels 1 to 10, you were your core class. Starting at level 11, you chose a Paragon Path, which further customized your class. And they could be based on your class, your race, your role, whether it's leader to defender. So again, you could have two fighters that turned into two completely separate Paragon Paths, and then Epic Destiny did the same thing for levels the 31 or from 21 to the 30. Yeah, it got complicated. Most fourth edition games never got too far past the Paragon tier of adventures. If you played Epic tier stuff, which was the Epic Destinies 21 and higher, I was generally you made your character that level. And like I said, it became complicated. Every level, you would choose new powers from a list of different powers. Dungeon Magazine and Dragon Magazine had new character options that were coming out. There were tons of supplements, including two extra Player's Handbook that added core classes. Player's Handbook 2 had the Avenger, Barbarian, Bard, Druid, Invoker, which was a controller that was divine powered. So it was basically a divine wizard. You had the Shaman, which was first of the primal power source, where they were nature based. Then the Sorcerer and the Warden, which the Shaman was a leader, a healer that was primal focus. The Druid was the controller of the primal stuff, and the Warden was the defender. Player's Handbook 3 introduced psionic classes. So you had the Ardent, which was a psionic healer, the Battle Mind, psionic defender, the Monk, a psionic striker, the Scion, a psionic controller. Then they added the Rune Priest, which was a divine leader, so it was a healer that healed with its strength score. It was super cool. I love the Rune Priest. It's kind of similar to the battle mechanic, I think, from the Artificer in 5th edition. So, anyway, and then the Seeker was a primal controller. So yeah, it became complicated. There became tons of Paragon Paths and Epic Destinies. When your character got to choose a Paragon Path, you would have 20 or 30 options for every character class. Now, some of these options overlap. Like there was quite a few that would be based on race. So any elf, whether you were a fighter or a paladin, could choose a few of them. But it got complicated. So just like third edition with the 3.5, you got what were called the essentials. The essentials classes were um, all distributed via what were called the Heroes books. There was Heroes of the Fallen Lands, Heroes of the Forgotten Kingdoms, and what they were kind of reworkings of current classes that took away a lot of the complexity by just giving them set abilities that leveled up as they got up. They only had one Paragon path, one Epic Destiny. So instead of it being so massively complicated, these essentials characters kind of leveled themselves up, still gave you plenty of room to customize them with the feats and the things like that. But were much more simple, very similar to 3.5, where they just kind of condensed everything and made it better. The heroes characters, to give you an example, I mentioned Warlock was one of the core classes. A heroes of a version of the Warlock was the Hexblade. Instead of having a bunch of different things, you would get a packed weapon, you would get an encounter ability, an at-will ability, and a daily ability based on your packed weapon. And then as you leveled up, you get a few other abilities, but for the most part, they just got more powerful. So it's much more simple to play the character. And yeah, now the thing that got people mad about 4th edition is it changed so much. You no longer had spell slots. One of the big criticisms was because of the leader, defender, striker, controller roles. Those fit into what was very popular in MMOs at the time, was the Pyramid of Power, it's sometimes called. Basically, you had your tank, DPS, and healers. With every so often, you would have a buffing class or a controlling class that was meant to do what was called CC, crowd control. So people kind of thought that this was just a video game version of D&D. All the people that had spent all that time learning the 3rd edition hated the fact that 4th edition was nothing like it. It did bring in a ton of new players, but it lost a ton of old players. So overall, 4th edition didn't kill D&D. It didn't help it either. As far as the video games, as much as they claimed that 4th edition was a video game version of D&D, they didn't actually have 4th edition video games. There's actually a lot more 3rd edition games than there were 4th, including the Dungeons and Dragons Online is you can still play it, a 3rd edition D&D MMO, and it's entirely based on the 3rd edition. It even has the Dungeon Masters in it. It's a cool game. The only 4th edition D&D game, wrong one, was Neverwinter. Neverwinter is still going. It's an action MMO. I got into the very first beta test of it. I played it for years. I still play every so often, but I'm not as fond of it anymore. And it was a 4th edition game. You had at-will abilities, you had counter abilities with a short cooldown, then you had the daily abilities, which you had to fill up a meter to use. It was a blast. It has some of the most entertaining combat of any MMO I've played. It was great, but that was literally the only 4th edition game. As you can see right at the top above Neverwinter, it's got that Dungeons and Dragons logo. You will see this logo in game stores all the time. If the game store has been around since 2008 is when Fourth edition came out, and then fifth edition didn't come out until 2014. So if it's been around since like 2008 to 2010, they've got fourth edition stuff. I don't know if they're still printing them, but I do know you can still buy the core rule books for fourth edition in game stores. You can still buy the adventures in game stores, and they were great. So if you want to try out for fourth edition, it's a ton of fun. It's a little bit complicated, but everyone feels special. Everyone feels powerful throughout the game, and I think that's a huge benefit for it. So finally, the current version. 2012 at Gen Con, Mike Murrells, I think it was, announces they're doing an open playtest for their new version of the D&D called the D&D Next. You would go to a website, you'd sign up for the playtest, you'd sign an NDA, then you'd be given your stuff. They play tested 5th edition. They did an open play test of 5th edition for 2 years. That is a more extensive play test than any other version of D&D. Merle said, I think there was like 75,000 play testers for 5th edition, and they still have play testers now. All the new rule books and adventures and everything that comes out, they are heavily play tested. I've got a few friends that are play testers, and if it weren't for the fact that I can't actually play at stores and stuff like that, I would probably try play testing too. Yeah, in 2014, they officially released the newest version. They called it Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition. The logo itself, there's actually two versions of the logo, but they have this same basic thing. Red and white are the colors now. That's it. You're only going to see red and white, and the ampersand is a big deal. As you guys can see way over here, this ampersand is awesome. It's technically the same ampersand that they've had since, if you look in the OD&D, I mean, it's a dragon, below in fire. But if you look at OD&D to the new one, just look how sharp that looks. Look how amazing it is. That ampersand is prominently featured in everything. 5th edition made some definite changes. There are originally 13 core classes, right? Yeah. I'm gonna count. 12. Now there's the 13. There are 12 base classes. They added Artificer recently, which are Barbarian, Bard, Cleric, Druid, Fighter, Monk, my favorite, Paladin, Ranger, Rogues, Sorcerer, Warlock, Wizard, and then they just added Artificer with Eberron Rising from the Last War. That's it. Now, each class generally has 2 to 3 subclasses in the player's handbook. Some have a few more, like Wizards have like 7 or 8 subclasses, one for each school. Clerics have at least 6 or 7 for each of the different domains. But that's it. As far as rule supplements, like I said, 3rd edition for 4th edition had a massive rules bloat. They had book after book after book after book coming out and adding new things. As far as books for 5th edition, they have only added a few actual supplements that added more things. You had the Sword Coasted Adventurer's Guide, which added a few new subclasses for every class except the Ranger. You had Xanathar's Guide to Everything, which added a few more subclasses, meaning most classes now have between like 5 to 7 subclasses if you have all the books. And then they added the Artificer in Eberron Rising from the Last War. That's it. 3 new character options, supplements. That only added a handful of new subclasses each time. Why did they do this? Because they want to avoid what happened with the 3rd and 4th edition. D&D 5th edition is by far the easiest edition to get into. Remember the whole basic advanced thing that used to happen in 1st and 2nd edition? They kind of brought that back for 5th edition, where they have advanced rules that are optional. Feats are optional in the 5th edition to Dungeons & Dragons. So you can actually play an entire campaign without using any feats. And it just makes the game a little more simple. Playing on a grid or a map is an optional rule for 5th edition. In each of the supplements, Sword Coast Adventures Guide, which most people will refer to as SCAG, SCAG, just because it's easier to say. So in SCAG and Xanathar's, those are optional books. You don't have to allow those options for your campaign. So you now have a return to form, which is kind of what 5th edition was this return to form where people that liked 1st and 2nd edition and the difference between basic and advanced and all that stuff, they're going to find stuff they like in 5th edition. People that like the complexity of the 3rd edition, or they like just the uniqueness of a 4th edition, you're going to find that here. All the good stuff from previous editions they took and put into 5th edition. All the really annoying stuff, like numbers crunch and crazy specific rulings and all of that was thrown away and replaced with the advantage disadvantage system, which is the kind of core feature of 5th edition. It's basically, if you're good at something, have some sort of advantage to this situation, like training, or you have someone helping you, you're going to roll what's called advantage, meaning you roll your d20 twice, take the higher of the 2 rolls. If you're in a disadvantaged position, if the task itself is particularly hard, or you have something that's limiting you in some way of doing this task, whether it's an opponent distracting you, whether it's a poison or something that's making it difficult for you to concentrate or difficult for you to use your muscles, you will roll with disadvantage. You take you roll 2d20s, take the lower of the 2 results, and that's it. Anytime you want to do something crazy in D&D, you explain it to the dungeon, or in 5th edition at least, explain it to the dungeon master. They will decide what skill or ability you have to use, and they will decide, okay, make a straight roll, which means just 1 d20. Make it with advantage if they want to reward you. Make it with disadvantage if it's something that would be difficult for you. That's it. It makes running D&D incredibly easy compared to earlier editions. You don't even have to know all the rules. If someone asks you a rules question you don't know, make a judgment call. The worst that happens is you give them advantage or disadvantage when they weren't supposed to get it. And you can change that and retcon it if you need to later. or just go with it. It's incredibly easy and incredibly simple. You will see this logo everywhere the D&D books are sold. Um, there are tons of them now. As far as ones that actually give like full blown additions to the rule set and stuff like that, it's basically Skag, Xanathar's, and the new Eberron book. There are other rules supplements like the Dungeon Master's Guide. That was the other things. Volo's Guide to Monsters added a bunch of new races, so that counts as new player options. But none of the classes are race locked or alignment locked anymore. So yeah. So you'll see that everywhere. There technically was only one game that was designed for and used for the 5th edition rules, and that was Sword Coast Legends. It lasted for about 2 years. It was not a great game. It didn't really show off the 5th edition system very well, and when the license expired, the game disappeared. You can't get it anymore. But it does show the secondary logo you will see for the Dungeons & Dragons. Again, red and white are the colors, but this time you can see the letters are white, the ampersand is white, and it's on a red background. Those are the two logos you will see for 5th edition, and you will see them everywhere. So I hope this has given you a pretty good idea of at least what the editions are, what makes them kind of unique. Just to kind of do a real quick refresher at the end of this very long video. Promise not all of them will be this long. Original Dungeons and Dragons and the basic series that goes through 1st and 2nd edition. Very simple, only for 4 classes, only a few races. Very limited as far as what you can do, what you can play, and generally they're level limited as well. There are a lot of tables and things like that, and in general you're not going to find too many books with this logo in the wild nowadays. And we go to AD&D, which is the first one where you start having more classes. It gets a little bit more complicated. There's still a fair amount of using tables and stuff like that. But the first D&D games for computers use this version. And it's still pretty well known. This is 1st edition is what they refer to it as. 2nd edition. This is probably the most well-known, and this is where D&D started getting really big for older players. The most well-known D&D video games use 2nd edition. You have Baldur's Gate, Icewind Dale, Planescape Torment. All of these use 2nd edition rules. I think all of those have enhanced editions that have come out now as well, so you can actually play these games on modern computers without much difficulty at all. These books, again, are going to be hard to find in the wild, but you can find the digital versions, I believe, on the DM's Guild. And in resale shops and stuff like that, you can find some advanced Dungeons & Dragons. The key defining feature of 2nd edition, THAC0. Love it, hate it. It was a weird system. You did math backwards. But once you figured it out, it was really simple to use. People make a big deal about it because describing it is remarkably difficult. Using it, remarkably simple. The other thing with this edition is they had kits, which allowed you to basically change the class you wanted to play pretty extensively right from level 1. They were subclasses you could pick basically at level 1. Third edition, the most widely played of the tabletop editions until 5th edition. As far as games were concerned, there weren't a ton. There was a Temple of Elemental Evil and Neverwinter Nights, but Neverwinter Nights. Oh, and then Neverwinter Nights 2. Neverwinter Nights was massive. It became an early MMO for a while. The single player campaign has just been re-released with the enhanced edition. People, even before the enhanced edition was out, people were still making mods and custom games for it. It had a game editor. There are tons of mods that add extra classes and stuff like that. Third edition is really defined by complexity and rules bloat. There are quite a few base classes, but you are required basically to multi-class in the third edition because you will stop gaining improvements eventually in your base class. And there are dozens upon dozens of prestige classes. There are hundreds of feats that all do different things and things like that. It is a highly customizable to where you can make these really unique, crazy characters, but it requires a massive time investment to do and a really good understanding of the rules. Also, lots of floating modifiers, which are numbers that you add on the fly while you're making an attack or casting a spell or something. They're not listed on your character sheet, let's say. So that's the third edition. Fourth edition, streamlined the process, made it so that everybody felt powerful right from level 1. This is the one with powers, the at-will powers and counter powers and daily powers. It had a fair amount of rules bloat, mostly in the number of powers and feats you could choose, but had a fair amount of classes as well. The Essentials series was a streamlined version of it with pluses and minuses. High-level Essentials characters were outclassed by the base characters every single time. But yeah, these books you will find in the wild. The third edition books you will find in the wild in game stores and secondhand shops. And there are currently no more 4th edition games, and then the Neverwinter, the one 4th edition game, switched to 5th edition rule set like a year ago or something. Still going on. It doesn't use the 4th edition rules, and the 4th edition rules it used were tenuous at best. They were inspired by 4th edition. And then finally, 5th edition. This is the current edition. It's been out since 2014. So we are entering the 6th year of its existence, but pretty soon here. It's really easy to get into. It's highly customizable. The DM's Guild and the D&D Beyond have tons of homebrew content if you want a more complex game. But you can play it with just the basic rules. You have like an advanced version and a basic version all meshed into one. So those are the additions of the D&D. If you ever hear things like Edition Wars or something like that, everybody has their favorite edition. And the ones that are the most popular to hear people fight over, there are 2nd edition purists, 3rd edition purists are the ones that are the most vocal and will say their edition is better than all other editions. All other editions ruin D&D. It's not true. Every edition has their own cool thing that makes them unique. They're all fun to play. Trust me on this. I've played most of them. I've played 3rd, 3rd through 5th on tabletop. I've played first and second in computer games. They're all fun. Find one that you like and stick to it, or play them all. They're all a blast. But if you're in the wild and you're trying to figure out which edition it is, sometimes the only thing you're going to have to go off is the logo. So by learning these logos, you can at least know, oh, this is the 3rd edition book. Oh, this is a 5th edition book. So you're not buying like a 3rd edition player's handbook and a 4th edition monster manual, and then a 5th edition Dungeon Master's Guide, and just getting completely blown away. So yeah, later things from in the begin at the beginning series are going to be like the basics of how to build a character, the basics of RPGs in general. I will have a series within this series, little mini series about the various campaign settings that exist, stuff like that. So anyway, that's all for me today. In the comments below, let me know, is this a series you guys like? Do you think it's going to be interesting to you? I know this one was kind of long-winded. I'm going to try and keep the other ones to like half an hour to 45 minutes, just to make them easier to watch. We'll just see how well that goes. So yeah, let me know what you thought about. Let me know the things that you're interested, that you want to see begin at the beginning episode on. And yeah, again, that's all for me today, and I will see you guys in the next time. All right, bye-bye.